you become commander-in-chief. President Biden has tried unsuccessfully to end the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. He's been doing it for months and months, along with you. Would you do anything differently? For example, would you withhold some U.S. weapons shipments to Israel? That's what a lot of people on the progressive left want you to do.
Let me be very clear. I am unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself. And that's not going to change.
Neoliberalism has always represented a great challenge for American leftists. The question has always been, at what point is it good enough? At what point can you as a voter say that despite my profound disagreements with a certain candidate, I am going to go all in and cast my vote for them, knowing that they do not represent my voice, knowing that they do not represent my values, and knowing that, unfortunately, the other way around and the other outcome that's possible is most likely significantly worse. And it is something that American progressives and leftists have dealt with multiple times now just in the past 10 years. In 2016, in the fallout of the Bernie Sanders primary of Hillary Clinton, a move that was not only necessary for the Democratic Party, but also for the American left as a whole, we saw many former Hillary staffers come out following Hillary's loss and state that Bernie bros were the reason that they lost. This despite polling showing that there were more Bernie to Hillary voters from the primary to the general election than there were Hillary voters to McCain in the 2008 election when she ran in the primary against Barack Obama. Now, of course, that's logical, but many times the reaction of these people, these online liberals who have the clout in the media, don't necessarily represent logic, they just represent narratives.
Let me tell you what I think happened in the primaries in 2008. Remember, she won that swath of voters from Pittsburgh down through West Virginia, right? Kentucky, Tennessee, which, with all due respect, happens to correspond with people who haven't quite accepted diversity in this country, okay? So Obama was black and she wasn't, and she won those voters. In 2016, Bernie did pretty well. Why? Because she was the black guy in a sense, right? Because those are people who were kind of intolerant of her, even though Bernie was Jewish. Not exactly, again, a crowd that the people kind of tended to kind of know. But I just think there was no coincidence in my mind that Bernie did very well in that same swath.
In the fallout of the 2024 election, we saw many of the same narratives begin to take hold. There was an obsessive reaction to go against both the uncommitted movement as well as pro-Palestinian protesters who felt like the Biden-Harris regime did not only not do enough when it came to stopping Israel's ongoing genocide of Gaza that has left thousands upon thousands dead, with likely tens of thousands more lost in the rubble, but they funded it and actively supported it. In the lead up to the election, Joe Biden continued to tout lies about 40 beheaded babies or babies being thrown in oven, things that have now come to light as not necessarily the truth and were really only creations for the consent that Israel needed to manufacture in order to justify the ongoing genocide in Gaza.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
However, despite knowing this, the reaction of many liberals online, especially liberal pundits and influencers, was not to necessarily attack the policies, actions, or inactions of the people in power, but instead call out protesters, call out the uncommitted movement, a movement, mind you, that was significantly more moderate than people even think. People like to think that the uncommitted movement was in lockstep with many of the pro-Palestinian community. However, the reality is many of the leaders in uncommitted were criticized for what was perceived to be them probably giving the campaign way too much credit and also conceding too much to the DNC. At the end of the day, the uncommitted movement put a lot of chips into having one speaker at the DNC as a symbolic gesture to try to win voters over and try to bridge that gap. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. And it was not only unfortunate for them, but it was also unfortunate for Kamala Harris because she lost. And I am not saying that this issue or one speech would have changed anything. But what I am saying is that the same people who like to disavow leftists and say that them voting for Jill Stein, Cornel West, or other more third-party candidates, or choosing to stay home had the impact that it did when the data doesn't necessarily show that that's true. The data more so shows that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, for that matter, who was the nominee for better part of a year before that, didn't make the case necessary to the American people to be the president in the next term. And quite frankly, they were right. I don't think that you can walk away from Joe Biden's first term and think it was anything to write home about. That's not to say that the fascism that we're seeing under Donald Trump is a better alternative, but you simply can't just write off the critiques because they are the lesser of two evils. At the end of the day, the case wasn't made, and Gaza was a part of it, and a very important part for younger voters whose voter turnout actually declined compared to 2020 into 2024. And you can argue that this is because of economics, but when it comes to younger voters, the issue really was Gaza and the genocide that Israel is committing in Gaza. And that brings me to the online liberal reaction. In the fallout of the Democrats' loss in 2024, you saw many liberals take the stand that, again, much like was the case in 2016, third-party liberal leftist voters were the reason that the Democrats lost, and they need to own this loss. It's on them and no one else. Certainly not the people that were running in the fucking election. Certainly not the people who were helping those people run in the fucking election. Certainly not the people who were talking to them every day. The reality is that many of the people who like to criticize leftists or other citizens who may not have voted in the way that they wanted are projecting. Instead of going after those in power or criticizing what the people who actually had the decision-making ability to change, instead of criticizing them, they are putting it all on the voters, and it shows you how warped this entire system is. And the fact that people find it more plausible to scold voters and to tell them how they should have voted for Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden because look at the alternative. It really reeks of projection. It reeks of delusion. And there is probably no better example of this than a recent tirade online by a former Kamala Harris staffer that has really taken off. When referring to the uncommitted movement, one staffer said, "Our campaign bent over backwards to accommodate them. The VP broke with Biden on Gaza. She met them. Senior leadership met with them. Uncommitted leadership told us they knew the VP was better than Biden and Trump, but they needed wins so they could rationalize their antics." So, by the way, characterizing people calling for an end to a genocide and putting pressure on politicians' antics is fucking gross. You're gross for that. That is insane shit. But on top of that, when you are characterizing the actions or rhetoric of Kamala Harris as better than Biden and Trump, it is laughable because that is the lowest bar that you can even seek to achieve. Donald Trump right now is talking about completely ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip. Joe Biden was the one who literally facilitated and supported the genocide in Gaza. So to say that Kamala Harris, the person who went out on the DNC stage and proceeded to say almost every single thing lockstep with Joe Biden and his atrocious genocidal actions and rhetoric about Gaza.
To the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom.
For her to be lockstep and say that they need to support the IDF, support Israel, and then to turn around at a campaign rally when she was interrupted by pro-Palestinian protesters and tell them to stop talking and that she was speaking, for voters to look at that whole picture and know that that still was the direction and the policy, that there was going to be no fundamental shift, no material change. Do you blame voters for not being enthused to vote for Kamala Harris? Do you blame voters for not being enthused? Do you blame people for trying to pressure the campaign in the right direction? And it is crazy because you have these same people who will say stuff like this, but the only time they will ever even talk about the conflict, the only time they will ever even talk about the ongoing slaughter in Gaza is to own the left, is to own other voters who didn't vote for Kamala Harris, because for them in their moronic, dim dingus heads, that's all that matters. It's about getting scores on Twitter. It's about getting dunks over the lefties and proving that your cause, the one that you worked for, the one that you worked so hard for, was righteous, when in reality, if you wanted it to be a righteous cause, you would have been right up there with them, putting pressure. And this is part of my bigger problem with DC. As someone who has worked in DC, as someone who has done several different jobs in the District of Columbia, I can tell you this. It has a weird way of warping your mind and deluding you into thinking that the horrible, disgusting, disgraceful stuff that you are doing on a daily basis is not only justified for yourself, but justified for humanity, that you are doing good. And it is an illness. It is genuinely a sickness. And we're seeing this come out in many of the former staffers of not only this campaign, but previous campaigns as well. And quite frankly, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of pretending that it's not an issue. I'm sick of pretending that their feelings about the campaign that they worked on are justified or more justified than the people who are dying in Gaza right now because of a slaughter that the Biden-Harris administration started and funded and funneled billions of dollars to. And the fact that all these people, the only thing they have to say is, well, it's not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Anthony Blinken's fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. the people who fundamentally have the power, but instead it's uncommitted. It's the voters who didn't vote. It's the voters who voted third party. It's the voters who felt conflicted because the president was overseeing a fucking genocide. But also, that unfortunately is just politics in this country. Guys, let me know in the comment section what you think of this. I also have a link to donate to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Please, please, please go click on the link and donate. Despite the fact that there is an embargo around food and aid coming into Gaza, it is critical that when food or aid is allowed to come in, that it be abundant, because we know that they really need it given the atrocious state of affairs there. So please, please, please donate as much as you can. I will be donating as well. Until next time, I'm Umar Q. We'll see ya.